I'm guessing that everybody in this room probably, much like myself, remembers the first Dogfish Head they ever had. Mine, I was telling the story to Sam actually at lunch. Ironically enough, I was in New Jersey. I went over to a Total Wine. Hey, look at this, $120. $9? That must be the six-pack price. And I've been hooked ever since. I kind of started at the top and been working my way throughout the portfolio, but it's a fantastic product. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Sam and some of the things that Dogfish Head has been doing over the last few years. Obviously, started June of 1995. Basically, just Sam, right? By yourself?
Little restaurant.
Just doing it, right? It's fantastic. Invented this wonderful thing, continual hopping. My favorite story there, the continual hopping with everybody remember the old football machines where you put the little guys on and they would vibrate around on the thing? That's how they did the first continual hopping. They just put the hops on that, tilted at a little angle. Runs into the boil. Off-centered ales for off-centered people, company motto. You gotta love that. I'm pretty sure that's why I'm here to introduce, based on the motto alone. Sam Calagione. It's been the stress of my life for the last 3 days. Is here to speak with us today about the books that he has written, 3 of them. The Brewing Up a Business, which was on this table. Extreme Brewing, and another book that if you haven't added to your collection, I highly recommend. He Said Beer, She Said Wine. It will help you talk to the other side. And that is enough from me. Welcome, Sam. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, John, Cam. Let's see, who else is it? Rachel. Everybody that I've met here has been really, really nice. And I wish we had, it'd be interesting if we had a policy like you do here at the brewery where every 5 feet there's just a keg on tap, a kiosk of booze accessible by everyone all day. Our productivity would tank pretty quickly. I actually got a picture of you all getting beer in the middle of the day back there, and I've already emailed it to my HR director to look into our own policies a little harder. Why can you do it at Google and not at a brewery? We do open our taps at 3 o'clock on Fridays for all of our coworkers to get together, and then throughout the day at our brewery there's sensory panels and people from every department are in these labs tasting, but it's not a pint at a time, it's 2 ounces, so this is kind of a treat. So what I thought I would do, will I break something if I move this a little that way? Is that going to break anything? Okay, I feel a little better about that in case these people are giving me the finger over there. I can see them on my peripheral a little better. But what I thought I'd do today is, knowing that you guys are a pretty entrepreneurial and creative company, but also hopefully a bunch of hardcore beer folk, I'd try to kind of weave in between the beers themselves and talking about beer stuff and sort of our company history and sort of how we approach business at our brewery. And the book that many of you got today is my first book, Brewing Up a Business, which is kind of more the business book of the 3 that I've written, kind of the story of our company and how we screwed up a lot of stuff in the last 14 years and still live to tell about it. So I'll start with some history stuff, and once in a while I'll reference a beer, and I'll show you the label, the one that I'm talking about, so you know which one if you want to get up and try it. But basically, as Adam said, we opened in 1995 as the smallest commercial brewery in the country. It wasn't like a big marketing point that we wanted to make. It was that I didn't have any money. I was an English major, and I was 25 years old. So raising money to build a normal-sized brewery was kind of beyond my resources. I was living here in Manhattan, right down the road at 26th and 7th Ave, and I was taking some courses up at Columbia in writing, and I happened to be paying my bills by working at a place called Nacho Mama's Burritos on like 103rd Street. Kind of a funky name for a beer place. But the owner, who was only a few years older than myself, really got into beer early. It was among the first wave of really beer-centric bars in Manhattan. And so, it really piqued my interest. And as a waiter and a bartender, I kind of learned that I had a pretty good palate and could describe to people what different beers tasted like, and really enjoyed turning people on to beer. So from there, myself and this guy started homebrewing in our apartments in New York City, which was a lot of fun. And then I really just got way into beer. Google didn't exist yet, so what I would do is go to, and I think the internet had just recently been opened up. Al Gore just kind of unlocked the key and unlocked, but in that era I wasn't really familiar with it, so I would go over to the New York Public Library and do Lexis and Nexus searches on what was going on, however you say it, in the beer industry. And in that era, it was mostly in the Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, a little California, and a little bit New England, that this renaissance of better beer was kind of taking hold. And I kind of parallel researched in a bunch of different industries and recognized sort of a greater trend of it kind of coinciding with, artisanal bakeries opening up and, mom and pop coffee roasteries. And I really saw that beer was an opportunity for, self-expression in making a product, and that it would be great to just differentiate it from, the commoditized, whether in our industry it's a light lager or, the commoditized Dunkin' Donuts or Wonder Bread. So in that era, there were some wonderful examples of real touchstone breweries that were sort of the first generation of craft breweries in America. Particularly, I think of Anchor Steam, which was the first, really is recognized, Fritz Maytag as sort of the patriarch of the American craft brewing renaissance. His brewery, he took over the nearly defunct Anchor Brewery in downtown San Francisco in, I think, 1965, and had the wherewithal financially to weather the storm of getting this movement going. He was the heir to the Maytag washing machine fortune, so that certainly helped during the lean years, I think. And then, of course, Ken Grossman up the road at Sierra Nevada Brewery, who was an engineer like many of you guys, and also owned a homebrew store and was thinking of either starting a bicycle shop or a brewery, and I'm glad he decided to do the latter because his Celebration was one of the real benchmark beers in my beer education. But as I was researching these breweries, there were these wonderful first generation craft breweries that I could look upon as sort of inspiration, that you could get your doors open and come from a non-academic brewing background and open a brewery. But and their beers were wonderful departures from the light lager style that dominated then, and still here 20 years later still dominates the domestic beer landscape. Just as a point of reference, of the 100% of beer sold in America, still over 90% of it is some slight variation of the exact same style of beer, light lager. Whether it's Corona, Heineken, Bud Miller, or Coors, it's still in essence in that light lager family. And there's nothing wrong with that light lager style. It's light, it's refreshing, but it's not offering a lot of flavor differentials. What separates Bud Miller and Coors has a lot more to do with the marketing, the hype, and the hyperbole outside the bottle than it does with anything that's distinct inside the bottle. And so breweries like Anchor and Sierra, kind of put a line in the sand and said, look, we're not going to be fancy big marketing companies, but we are going to make really distinct liquid inside our bottle, and hopefully a small group of people would rather think about what's inside their bottle than the marketing outside of it. So they really did open the door for breweries like Dogfish Head to enter the marketplace. But what I wanted to do was, while we had these wonderful examples out there, the Sierras and the Anchors, their beers are super flavorful. Old Foghorn or Bigfoot, just tremendous flavorful beers. But for the most part, they're still brewing within traditional styles. They're referencing mostly continental styles from England, Belgium, and Germany primarily. Pale ales, doubles, Maibachs, Hefeweizens, all wonderful, flavorful beers, but their touchstones are pre-existing styles from around the world. And so my hope and my idea was to develop a business that wasn't style specific. And there was a number of reasons that I wanted to do that. The first one was I was pretty amateur home brewer, and I knew if I started making beers that had no style reference points and they sucked, people wouldn't be able to tell because there was nothing to compare it to. And in the early years, some of them sucked. And I could be like, no, that's how it's supposed to taste. You never had a raisin beer before? Of course that's what they're supposed to taste. And I also intentionally wanted to start really, really small, knowing that I could experiment with a lot less risk. In other words, even the average restaurant brewery in America in that era and today has about a 10-barrel brew house. Us brewers calibrate our world in barrels because that's how we pay taxes, and that's why a keg is called a half barrel. That keg up there is 15.5 gallons. So a barrel of beer is 31 gallons. So the average brewing system is about 300 gallons or 10 barrels for a restaurant brewery, and mine was 10 gallons or 1/30th the size as far as what I could yield per batch, which, you know, I'd have to brew the first year we were open 2 or 3 times a day, usually 5 or 6 days a week, in this little room in my restaurant in a brewery built out of kegs. We would brew in the kegs, ferment in the kegs, and then transfer it into another keg and carbonate it, put it online. A pathetic business model as far as zero efficiencies. But what it was, in hindsight, it was really perfect for this, our mission of off-centered ales for off-centered people, because we could afford to, I'd get so bored brewing the same beers that I could go into my kitchen, I could take some raisins, I could take some vanilla beans, some chicory, some coffee, some licorice root, bring them into my brewery, put a handful in, measure it out, and just kind of as a iterative process, come towards recipes that were really unique. And we had a built-in tasting panel at our pub, you know, paying us $3 or $4 for the right to tell us you need to add more of this or less of that. So it was actually a wonderful way for us to find our feet as a commercial brewery without a lot of risk. And you know, we've flash forward to today. You know, as I said, when we opened, we were the smallest commercial brewery in the country out of 600 or 700. Today, I think we're around the 25th biggest craft brewery in the country out of about 1,400, and we're the biggest commercial brewery in the Mid-Atlantic region. We do about 8,000 cases of beer a day from our facility, and I'm proud of the way we've grown, but I think I'm most proud of the fact that when we opened in 1995, the average beer coming out of that 10-gallon brewery was 9% alcohol and made with 6 as opposed to the traditional, quote-unquote traditional, 4 ingredients of water, hops, yeast, and barley. And flash forward to today, and we are brewing right now on our 100-barrel brew house. Within 4 hours of each day, we surpassed my annual production in my first year. And it's pretty surreal. But what I'm most proud of is that if you go to our loading dock at our brewery today, the average case of beer going on a truck is still 9% alcohol and made with 6 ingredients as opposed to the normal 4. So we've been really lucky. We almost went bankrupt a number of times as we stuck to our guns and we didn't discount our beer or dumb it down. Particularly in the late 90s, I had to take all the profits from my restaurant brewery and push them to my commercial brewery to keep it from going bankrupt. But you know, we've been really lucky to look now at what's happened in the beer industry and see that we really haven't had to shift what we were doing in these 14 years. To a small degree, the beer industry has shifted towards what we're doing. So while the light lager style still, you know, far and away dominates the domestic beer landscape, the growth of the beer industry is in the craft beer sector, the more full-flavored beers that are out there and that we are a part of. So just allow me to sip and have a beer while you do. I'm going to pause for a moment. It's all QC. This is all part of my presentation. And I'm going to try and talk for about 40 minutes and leave 20 minutes open for questions. So if someone can give me a high sign or the finger from this side once I get to 40 minutes, that'd be great. So to kind of take you through our evolution, as I mentioned, as a company, you know, we started very, very small and are now a little less small in the context of the beer industry. We, Dogfish Head, have just under 1/20th of 1% of the domestic beer market. And the biggest craft brewer in America, which is Boston Beer, Sam Adams, has just about 1% of the domestic beer market. So as much as you guys know and love craft beer and it's part of your lives, and as much as a city like New York supports great craft beer, and you go into places and they got 3 or 4 lines with a Brooklyn, a Dogfish, and a Magic Hat, it's still an anomaly. It's still not a mainstream success story in terms of scale. But it is where the excitement is. In essence, the domestic beer industry grew less than 1% last year, and yet craft beer sales were up over 6%, which sounds small, but in a challenging economy, it's still a real bright spot. And like any business, like I'm sure you guys are anxious about the economy, and believe me, we are too. We got 100 people at our company now that I have to think about as I make decisions for the company, and we're a little anxious, but so far we seem to be holding our own. And I think what's happening is to some extent where craft beer is keeping its momentum in this challenging economy because it is such an affordable luxury. The person that right now might not be buying an SUV or a vacation home or a fancy watch or whatever can still treat themselves to the best beer for $10 a 6-pack. And if they try to buy world-class wine in that same liquor store for $10, they'd have to decant that volume into a Dixie cup. High-end wine goes for hundreds of dollars a bottle. So craft beer really represents this great affordable luxury. So Dogfish Head, we're still growing. We've averaged 40% revenue growth over the last, I think, 6 years, and we're on target to do that again. I'll talk in a little bit about our challenges and do we want to grow this fast even if we could, and how it affects a brand like ours. But kind of getting back to our story, we really struggled in the late 90s because we were, even in the beer industry, we're considered that brewery making weird beers and using weird ingredients. And it really took until Michael Jackson, not the freak who's auctioning off his life right now, but Michael Jackson is the world's foremost beer expert, a writer based out of the UK. And he wrote an article about Dogfish Head, I think in 98 or 99 for All About Beer magazine, where he basically said, hey, while there might not be any stylistic reference points for what Dogfish Head is doing, they're actually, beers that are worth seeking out, and they are actually well thought out beers. They're not adding these crazy ingredients just to be crazy. They're actually, these flavor components work really well in the context of these beers. And that also kind of coincided with we'd gotten some press from like Food and Wine magazine and beer or wine enthusiasts and some other publications. And our Raison d'Etre beer, which is up there, was voted Beer of the Year for 2000 from Malt Advocate magazine. Again, as you can see, I'm referencing some relatively niche publications, All About Beer and Malt Advocate magazine. One thing our company has never done is traditional advertising. Again, knowing that we're this David up against the Goliath, and if we're going to try and differentiate ourselves by the quality and distinction of the liquid inside the bottle instead of the hype and hyperbole of traditional marketing, we decided early on, when we didn't have a choice and we didn't have money for advertising, that would be a route that we didn't want to go, because we can't compete against the big breweries and build as big of a billboard or a blimp or anything, talking animals, mud wrestling women. It just wasn't a direction we wanted to go in. So Dogfish Head has only advertised in the beer publications to support the industries that support us. But we have been very fortunate to get sort of a disproportionate amount of media attention compared to the size of our brewery. Stories in New York Times, the New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, Food and Wine, Men's Journal. And what's always interesting is, all we spend money on is doing events like this, donating beer, doing beer dinners, tasting opportunities. And every month I'll throw some beers in the mail to a publication that I respect. And, our theory is that we're already have very high expectations of our consumers. the big breweries essentially commodified beer and only differentiate it by the marketing. So we were basically trying to decommodify beer, and it takes a lot of respect for your audience, your consumer, to say, look, I'm not going to tell you this is the best beer in the world, because there is no such thing as the best beer in the world. Beer is subjective. Everybody's palate is different. We just think ours is a unique, interesting, worthwhile beer. Try it and let us know what you think. And we've really taken the same approach to marketing, which is there's a lot more cachet in having sort of a third-party endorsement from a respected source like the Wall Street Journal, them saying this beer is valid and worth checking out, compared to if we took out a same-size ad in the Wall Street Journal and said, our beer is awesome, you need to try it. That doesn't resonate with an intelligent consumer. So we've always kind of done this grassroots, let's just let's get them to try the beer. But in that early era, it was a real challenge. But again, around 99, this beer won some awards. And then around 2000, Michael Jackson was visiting the University of Pennsylvania, right an hour and a half from my brewery up the road in Philadelphia. And they have a pretty renowned archaeology department and museum. And just in that era of the late 90s, this whole sort of specialty of molecular archaeology became a really vibrant industry or section of academia. And what they would do is they had all these crazy carbon blah, blah, blah testing I can't explain to you, where they analyze the residue of stuff found in tombs around the world from whatever era. And so in the 50s, University of Pennsylvania discovered a tomb in Turkey believed to belong to King Midas. And they didn't have the technology to really analyze what they found in that tomb. Unlike the legend of Midas being buried with, this vast fortune, the tomb was really significant for a number of reasons. The first was, as the archaeologists pulled the rocks away and actually walked into the tomb, the first thing they noticed was all the tapestries on the wall, all the color left that room in front of their eyes, because it hadn't been exposed to air in 2,700 years. So after the color left the room before their eyes, the next thing they would notice was how bad the room stunk. And it's because instead of being buried with all this gold, he was buried with the remains of his funeral feast. So later on, they figured out what that was, and it was basically petrified lamb stew. And then they found all these shards of crockery that had some sort of residue on it. And so the theory being that whenever someone important dies, they jam the tomb full of food and really good booze for their journey from this world to the afterworld, sustenance for that journey. So long story, a little less long, they in the 90s, they pulled this stuff back out of their labs and their warehouses that they discovered in the 50s, and they could analyze it, and they figured out exactly what people were drinking the night Midas was buried 2,700 years ago. So, Patrick McGovern, Dr. Patrick McGovern, who is sort of the world's foremost, sort of the Indiana Jones of ancient beverages, based out of there, called up Michael Jackson and said, hey, we made this discovery and we want to do a modern interpretation of what we found, but it's got grapes and honey and all this stuff in it. What do you recommend we do? And Michael was gracious enough to say, you got there's some freaks down the road from you making beer with pumpkins and coffee. Give them a call, jokingly. So long story short, we did this beer called Midas Touch, which is our most awarded beer. You can have it here. And it's, as per the evidence, it's made with honey, grapes, barley, and saffron. So it's a great touch-off point for sort of my diatribe on where the beer industry's gone and where it can hopefully go. Because this whole concept of tradition and traditional brewing is one that is pretty much manufactured in the eyes of by big breweries for the consumer. In other words, when people talk about that's not a traditional beer, the tradition they're referencing, whether they're conscious of the nomenclature or not, is Reinheitsgebot, which is the German Beer Purity Act of 1516. And that at that point in history in Bavaria, the Bavarian government basically said it was illegal to make beer with anything other than, they didn't know what yeast was yet because Louis Pasteur didn't exist and there weren't really microscopes, but they said it could only be beer if it's made with water, yeast, or water, hops, and barley. And so even the bulk of breweries around the world reflexively began acknowledging that as traditional brewing. Even to the point where the big American breweries, lobbied our federal government to say, yeah, these are pure beers, but we're also going to count corn and rice. They're cheaper ingredients, but we'll say that that's cool to count that in traditional ingredients. So here you have a world where this tradition has taken hold. And so a brewery like Dogfish Head comes in and wants to color outside the lines, and we're painted as being a bunch of anarchists. But which is fine by me. But what a discovery like Midas proves, and we do a beer called Chateau Jiahu that's a 9,000-year-old recipe, the oldest known fermented beverage in history, which it literally coincides with when man shifted from a hunting and gathering nomad to hanging out in villages and waiting for crops to grow so that they could drink whatever they just made and see the gods. So it's a legitimate school of thought that beer is responsible for civilization as we know it. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But at any rate, beers like Jiahu, beers like Midas, beers like Ninkasi, which is one that Anchor brewed that was made with date and fig bread from I think, Egyptian hieroglyphics. Those beers long predate this Reinheitsgebot rule. So what it proves is since the dawn of civilization, brewers were making these beautiful, colorful, unique beers with whatever indigenous exotic ingredients grew close to their homes. And that's what defined the brewing industry for their culture. And our country before Prohibition had a lot of diversity in the beer scene. A city down the road like Philadelphia with a high concentration of German immigrants, well, they brewed awesome lagers there. Whereas up here in New Amsterdam, was a lot of English and Dutch, and there were great ale breweries here in New York. And these little breweries in America, every town had one, and the beers, the liquids themselves, represented the diversity and color of the people that lived in that neighborhood. And these big breweries came along with these gigantic advertising campaigns, and the advances in refrigeration and transportation, trains and highways, all kind of coincide around Prohibition, so that after Prohibition, instead of every neighborhood having a brewery, these big breweries came out of the gates and started distributing nationally. And what they did is says, let's make our beer, the liquid, as innocuous and inoffensive as possible so that it can appeal to as wide a range of people as possible, and just try and convince them with marketing on why ours is better than the other breweries. And they nearly succeeded in taking all that color and diversity out of the American brewing scene. And it was really the efforts of the Fritz Maytags of the world, and Ken Grossman's here in this town, Garrett Oliver, Brooklyn Brewery, on the East Coast, Harpoon, Jim Cook. Those are the bigger guys that really opened a lot of doors for us littler guys. So flash forward today, as I said, there's 1,400 breweries in America. There are basically every American now lives within 10 miles of their local brewery, so they're really accessible for people to get out and visit. I don't know how far I am to this talk, but I didn't mention any of my books yet, but that's all right. I'd rather make sure everyone understands who the big breweries are and who the little guys are. I'll get back to talking about some of the beers. That's probably a good idea, Sam, right? Yeah. So at any rate, support your local breweries. That's my end of that diatribe. Probably not. But one of the challenges we have, and I imagine you guys get it too, is, as I mentioned, we're less than 1/20th of 1%, but we're perceived as this sizable brewery now. And the beer industry is, I'm a hardcore beer geek, and beer geek is a term of endearment. But what I'm not is a beer snob. And beer geeks and beer snobs, for all intents and purposes, might have the same level of beer knowledge as each other. The difference is, beer geeks want to learn because they want to experiment new stuff and share it, turn their friends on to what's good, whereas beer snobs want to hold their knowledge over other people, and they're cool because they know more than other people about beer. So one of the challenges that even a relatively small company like ours gets is, Dogfish Head's making 7,000 or 8,000 cases of beer a day. They've jumped the shark. They're too big. They're no longer experimental. And it is kind of laughable if you actually come and tour our brewery, because as we got resources, as we got profitability, I basically shoveled everything that we had into Quality, our quality control department is 4 people big and second to none. And innovation, we still have that 10-gallon brewery that we started with that we use a newer version of. We have a 5-barrel brew house at our restaurant brewery in Rehoboth, where every 2 weeks we do a beer that's never been done before and is only seen there, unless we really like it, and then we'll bottle it at the big brewery the next year. And we have our 100-barrel brew house. So innovation has actually only been ramped up as we've gotten more resources to kind of fly our freak flag as high and proud as we can. So one of the more recent examples of where that innovation led us is we kind of have a weird situation because we are known as a brewery that will put pretty much anything we can run down with our truck and kill and put into our boil kettle. For that reason, on Monday mornings, we pick up our phone. We have 800 numbers on all our bottles. So sometimes it's just like, "You guys rule, man!" on the 800 number answering machine. But there was another funny one where this guy was like, he's like, "Oh, me and my buddies are at this bar right now. And we just want to say we've drank Dogfish Head all night. We're just loving your Indian brown ale, right, guys? Guys? Is anyone here?" And so we're pretty sure this dude blacked out in a bar and got locked in there. But we'll often get calls from people who say, "Hey, I'm a brewer in the Arctic Circle. I read your story. We grow these amazing cloudberries up there. I'd love to send you some, and can you brew with them?" And we did that one, and then we had to pay for the charges when it came into the country and all the taxes, and we did the math, and we'd have to charge $19 per glass to break even on the cloudberry beer. So you won't be seeing that one in a bodega near you anytime soon. But sometimes we get some freaky ones like, "Hi, my name is Lightning Bolt. I live in Sonoma and I harvest crystals, and you guys totally need to do a crystal beer for your karma." But I got one about 3 years ago from a guy in Baltimore who was a hardcore beer guy, Dogfish fan, and he was a high-end flooring salesman, and he was down in Paraguay sourcing special exotic wood for flooring, and to kill time, he went to the local dirt floor winery and tried their wine and was like, "Wow, this is really different, really good. What's up with this?" And they just kind of pointed to the barrels that it was in. He did some research and figured out that it was in this Palo Santo wood, which is just a species of wood that's indigenous to that area. And being a Dogfish fan, he smuggled the wood home. Some of it, I don't know if it was in his intestines or in a bag, but it did come in grams. And he brought it to us and called us up and said, "I think you'll be interested in this." So it sounded interesting enough. I smelled the wood. It was really so different than oak, which is what all breweries and wineries age their liquids on. So we did a test batch in our pub in Rehoboth, that 5-barrel brewery that I mentioned we still use pretty much every week. And we were really blown away because oak traditionally adds like vanilla, marmalade-y notes to whatever you age it on. Whereas this wood, this Palo Santo wood, adds caramel and spice notes. It's a relative of frankincense. It's actually used in incense production, it's super resiny wood. It's actually used to build gears out of. It's so dense that it sinks in water. You can shoot it with a gun, and the bullet will bounce to the ground. It was also, incidentally, a pre-Renaissance cure for syphilis. So you know who you are out there. You got that going for you. Drink up. So long story short, we really loved that beer, and we said, let's go for it. And we commissioned a giant tank to be made out of it. And so this wood was never used in America except for incense and flooring. So we first had to lobby the federal government to let us put something that you ingest in this wood, which took a lot of lawyer dollars and time. And then we had to actually get this wood from Paraguay to America. I'm not blowing smoke up your asses when I say that most of the research I do for a project like this is through Google, where if you look at our Sati project, where I can just go on and put in a few words and it'll lead me to a million places. That's kind of what we did with this, and through that research, I found there's only 2 companies left in America that could make wooden tanks this big, and one of them is called Aero Tank up in New York State. And so we sent all the wood up there. These guys were kind of freaked out to have to make something out of this wood, really scared about it. Long story short, it cost us $140,000 to make this one tank. And so the return on that investment is my kid's problem, not mine. But it allowed us to make something that was really, really unique. And again, it allowed us to bring the battle back inside the bottle. So that we don't advertise that we did this with this tank. We rely on hardcore beer people to tell our story. That's a little untrue in the case of Apollo, because what we did do was when we were building the tank and doing the research batches, we shot it ourselves with a camera. And there's this little company called YouTube that Adam was mentioning, and you can go and see this tank getting built on YouTube. And we also took our first 2,000 4-packs of this beer, and we turned that video into a DVD, and we just hand stamped them against the 4-packs. Again, knowing that it would be much more powerful, knowing that the first people that would take a risk on a $12 or $13 4-pack of Dogfish Head beer are already people that trust our brand enough to take that leap of faith, and that they would be the ones willing to spend that 20 or 30 minutes watching this film about how that beer came along. Then they would be the evangelists who would go out and let their friends that they might be recognized as sort of the beer expert in their community, and hopefully let them help us tell our story. So we now sell over 3,000 cases of that Palo Santo beer a month. It takes us 2 months to do each batch. So we're going to need to build another one of those tanks next year. Our chief operating officer's not too happy about that. But so that's the story of Palo Santo beer. Where am I at time-wise? Someone tell me that.
20 minutes.
Damn. Before the Q&A?
No.
Oh, all right. You're about to have to sit through my interpretive dance routine because I'm kind of out of. Okay, so I got 20 minutes left counting questions. Okay, so for a few minutes, I'll just kind of summarize like where we're at and where we think we're going. We are a private company, and we did recently, when kind of before the economy took the downturn, we'd been on the Inc. magazine list of fastest growing private companies for a bunch of years. So we did get offered that, a stupid amount of money to sell, and I had to think about that for a few minutes, and I realized that all I've done with my adult life is this company, and that if I were to sell, I would just watch it in the marketplace and obsess over it as much as if I still had it, so I might as well keep it. And so, I'm glad that I made that decision. I've got 2 kids who I do hope someday inherit all my debt. We basically, our brewery right now will do about 100,000 barrels of beer this year, and our facility is sized to do at the extreme of our capacity constraints a little over 300 barrels. So my goal is to hit 300 barrels right when my daughter turns 21 and just be like, this is your fucking problem now. And retire. So that's kind of that's what's controlling our growth curve. How to screw my kids. But in all honesty, as I said, we've averaged 40% growth for all the last 6 or 7 years, and we don't think it's in the best interest of our brand to keep growing this quickly, nor do we think it's the marketplace would allow us to, because as you can imagine, as the base gets bigger every year, to stay at that percentage unit growth becomes really challenging, and growth isn't really what drives our company. We have a saying of, we never let the tail of money wag the dog of inspiration. So our number one motivation is continue to innovate and ratchet up the quality and distinction of the beers that we do. We also, if you go to dogfish.com, you can learn a lot about our company. We have tours that you can sign up for. Over 600 to 1,000 people come tour our brewery every week, particularly in the summer. We have Dogfish Head Brew Pub. We have a small distillery that our liquors don't get up this far, but you can find those in the Mid-Atlantic. So I invite you to come down and visit us and to find our beer around here and drink it, but I wanted to make sure I had enough time left over to take a bunch of questions. So thank you for your patience. You won't offend me if you go up and refill your glass while we're talking here. This also, the questions are great because it gives me a chance to drink. Okay, go. We got, there's a mic, wow.
All right, okay. How do you feel about exports? Do you think craft beers are something that the U.S. can finally export to the rest of the world except financial chaos?
Yeah, I mean, that's an awesome, timely question because the Brewers Association, which is a trade group that represents the vast majority of us craft brewers, has a very very robust export development program. And 20, 30 years ago, American beer was a laughingstock of Western Europe. And what's ironic is before Michael passed away, he stood on a stage in Germany, of all places, and when asked who's making the best beer in the world, thinking whoever was in the audience, that brewer in Germany, thinking it was a rhetorical question, and he was like, actually, it's the Americans. He almost got booed off the stage. But if you look at what's happening in international brewing culture, places like Scandinavia and Italy have some of the most dynamic and exciting craft beer scenes, and those brewers aren't afraid to tell you that they're referencing the American craft breweries way more than they are, the Belgians even, or the English. And so for us, we sell a little bit of beer in Canada, but right now, because we've been growing as quickly as we have and we can't keep up with our demand, our distributors in America would be pretty pissed off if we started exporting when we can't even, like Jerry over there would break my arms from Oak Distributing here in New York if I sent containers right now to England instead of to New York. So until we see an opportunity that coincides with us having excess capacity, it's probably not in our immediate future. I was over brewing in Rome about a month ago with a great little craft brewery there. We did a beer called My Antonia that is a continually hop Pilsner, strong Pilsner, that got a lot of press and excitement in that market, and he's asked if we can keep doing that one together. So I might just do some co-branded stuff with my friends who own little breweries in Europe. Although my friend Peter, the brewmaster at New Belgium, the great brewery that makes Fat Tire, came back from a trip in Asia and sent me a bottle from a small brewery in Japan called Catfish Head Brewery. That had our shield logo with a catfish in it, and their flagship problem was 60M pale ale instead of 60-minute. And the translation in the English was, "We are crazy, crazy brewers making crazy strong beer." And I had to send him a lawyer letter just so there was a precedent that we kind of tried to defend it. But I think it's pretty funny,
Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
Over here. So, thanks for coming in. Thanks for the beer.
Thanks
the
for drinking
Abraham,
with me.
It's quite delicious.
All right, thank you.
And the recent one I had, I think it's like the 2 tons of cherries or the 20 tons of cherries.
Uh-huh.
It was a little strong, but I made it through it.
Okay, good.
So
It's a marathon, not a foot race.
yes, it's got
Not
a
a
cork
sprint.
It's got a Scotch cork in it, and I go at it, wherever
Once
I can.
in a while.
So I have a question for you. I've been actually an intermediate brewer for about 10 years, and part of it was seeing the Sabco Brewery video that you did with their kind of kegel build out. I kind of, being a do-it-yourselfer, have started building out an all-electric, all-grain. So I'm finally making that move to all-grain. I've just got to weld,
Converting
do a little
kegs?
grinding.
You're converting kegs to your vessels? Nice.
Absolutely.
Nice.
So it's very similar to be like single tier 3 keg, but heat exchanging instead of rims.
Nice.
So, but anyway, so my question is, being that I've done more of the all grain and extract, extract and going into all grain, aside from the most important things like being sanitary and so forth, what would you be the kind of the little tidbit of advice when I'm going to that all grain kind of mash state? Because I have to tell you, I'm incredibly nervous that I'm going to absolutely blow it the first time around. So
Right. Well,
just what your thoughts are.
I would say the biggest jump up that you can make is the yeast quality and going to liquid yeast. Are you already using liquid yeast?
Yeah, I've been using liquid yeast, and I'll usually do a starter a couple days before to get a larger pitch. But I'm mostly concerned about starch conversion and just getting getting a good yield.
Right. The book Extreme Brewing isn't that good for helping you, so I'm not recommending it because it's my publisher's going to love that. But because it's partial grain recipes, so we're not looking for full-on starch conversion for those recipes. But I would recommend going to beertown.org, which is the home site of the Brewers Association. A guy named Palmer wrote an awesome book especially jumping into the world of all grain brewing. Charlie Papazian's Joy of Home Brewing touches on it, but Palmer's book's way better technically for a hardcore. Sounds like the direction you're going in.
And thanks again for coming in. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
That was actually my first question, so I'll go to my second question. But it's interesting, right? With like Coors and AB going away, and you look at there's no real monster in the domestic brew scene, and so without realizing that you were like 5/100ths of now the market share domestically, right. I would always compare you to Sierra, and probably that's wrong now. So when you look at the domestic scene, like who do you compare Dogfish to?
Right. That's a good question, and what's even more blurry is the fact that the big breweries seeing the success relative minor of the true little craft breweries have either started their own quasi-craft brands, craft with a K, where, like Blue Moon, not too many people know that's 100% owned by Coors, and Leinenkugel, not too many people know that's 100% owned by Miller. And so they use these beers as sort of weapons to displace true little craft breweries. And it's kind of bittersweet because they're really well-made beers, and they are great bridge beers in that they give the Coors or Miller consumer the confidence to take a baby step outside that light lager comfort zone, and hopefully they can keep taking steps across the bridge to where freaks like us and Stone and Rogue are hanging out. It's definitely, we want people to know where their beer is made. Particularly at a time like this, I feel like the consumer's a little jaded about business in general and big business, and I think people want to support little homespun mom and pop companies, which is what Dogfish Head represents, and Harpoon and Rogue and Brooklyn and all those little breweries. So as far as who do we really, I read all the beer publications, and I love this. I love seeing the success of my other craft brewing brethren, but we don't really have any touchstones for other companies as far as we've never looked at another brewery or what beers they do and say, oh, that looks like it's going to be a hot style. We're not really using them as reference points, but breweries that I admire would be Sierra Nevada is probably highest on my list as one that's run by beer-centric people instead of business-centric people, and it shows through in the way that they put everything into their bottle. Really don't advertise much at all. So that's a brewery that's a touchstone for me. And New Belgium's a wonderful company. Sam Adams I have great respect for. So those are some of the bigger guys that I respect.
Hi there.
Hello, Sam.
Hey, Sam. Thanks a lot for bringing the beer and the keg and the bottles and
My
everything.
pleasure. Thank you for drinking.
It's really wonderful. And we touched on this earlier, just you and me. In the New Yorker, you had a great profile. It really talked about you, and it quoted Garrett Oliver. And one thing he said about the 120-minute IPA was, "I don't find it pleasant to drink. I find it unbalanced and shrieking."
Right.
And I was curious, what do you
That'll
think
be
of...
on our coaster soon.
Yeah. Unbalanced, which is awesome. But what do you think of that sort of criticism? And also, what do you think of, say, Brooklyn Brewery's beers, since it's a local brew to New York?
Right. No, that's a fair question because it's out there. And Garrett is a friend of mine. And I think, again, I was saying earlier how it's great that there are all these different beers out there because everybody's palate is different and beer is subjective. So for Garrett to say that is within his rights. And he was down at my brewery a month ago, and we took him to a campfire thing and traded him a case of local one for a case of our Pangea. And so I have great respect for him as a brewer. That said, the position that he really takes in that article is, frankly, I feel like anybody, neither Sam Calagione nor Garrett should tell people what they should be drinking. Everybody should decide for themselves what they should be drinking, and that's what's great about the craft beer movement. There's something for everyone. So for me, it's a little frustrating for a brewer to take sides and say and try to direct people, because I get very nervous that our movement, which is truly a populist ground roots movement, can have shades of sort of an elitist perspective of the real beer people know what to drink, stay away from that weird shit. And I've heard it said that, these extreme beers are any monkey can add too much hops to a boil kettle. That doesn't take skill. And I've had beers that maybe I would deem as too hoppy, but I feel like if there's a monkey somewhere that's adding a stupid amount of hops to his boil kettle, and then there's a village down the road from that monkey's brewery that happens to love stupidly hopped beers, then that stupidly hopped monkey beer deserves to exist, you know? Let the market decide what deserves to exist. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone here is named Sam, right? That's right. All right, cool. I'm in the right place.
So the TTF is doing this thing about adding nutrition and serving labels. Do you guys care one way or another?
That's a timely question. My wife runs our website, and the man came down to her yesterday about us having calorie counts up on our website. And I guess their position is, unless you're going to say everything like the carbohydrates and blah, 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 you can't just list the calories. But that's kind of what consumers want to know. So I think either we're still talking with the TTB about that. We've taken it off, I think, our website out of respect to they're asking us to do that. You know, our beers, alcohol and calorie content are relatively proportionate. So when we brew big beers, you know, you better go for a long run if you're going to drink them every day. One funny quick digression, when we were Dogfish Head and Sam Adams in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were kind of in a foot race for strongest beer in the world. They had it with Triple Bock, then we had it with Worldwide Stout. They took it back with something and blah, blah, blah. So we did our Worldwide Stout one year, and it was when Millennium had just come out, and we knew we had to beat whatever it is, 24, 20-something, 5 or something. And usually the beer was 18, 19% alcohol, and this one came back from the lab, and we're like, oh, we could tell it was, we went for it. And they're like, oh, we got good news and bad news for you. The bad news is it's the second strongest beer ever brewed. It's 23-point-something% alcohol. The good news is it's the most caloric beer that's ever been measured. It's 666 calories per 12-ounce bottle. So it's basically the Antichrist of beers. I always keep one under my car seat. I never drink and drive, but if I ever get snowed into a blizzard, you could live for like 2 weeks off that one bottle. You know? Question over here.
Yeah, this might be more of a question for the audience, but I never know where to get this Midas Touch and this Palo Santo type of stuff. Can you get it on the internet, or
Actually,
can somebody tell me?
Whole
where?
Foods, but that's a really good segue, because if you go to dogfish.com, and some of you beer/computer folks that are way smarter than I am with this stuff. Oak, our distributor in New York, and Elizabeth have done the best job of the whole country in getting the sites up. But if you go to dogfish.com, you can click to a map, and there's all these little red dots, and you click on the red dot, and that's a retailer selling our stuff, and it'll tell you which beers. And if you look at that map right now, it looks like Dogfish Head Brewery is located on the Lower East Side, not in Delaware, because all of our other regional distributors have been lazy assholes and haven't gotten as much places up as the people in New York have. So if you go there, you'll be able to click and find who has our beer here in New York easily.
All right, fantastic. If anybody else can help me, please.
Help a brother out. Need a miracle. Uh-huh. Sorry.
So you were talking a little while ago about this world before Prohibition, where every town had their own brewery and so forth. But of course, these days, many of the craft breweries have a very wide distribution, and Dogfish Head included. So I'm just wondering when and how you made the decision to sort of distribute beyond your local area.
Yeah, and I mean, I think are in 27 states, and frankly, the scale of my breweries already kind of exceeded my wildest dreams. And I go in and see the tanks that we're going to be putting in next month that are 4 stories high, and it's humbling. So there was never a conscious decision of how to grow, where to grow, when to grow. It's just kind of like, we started to get a nice little cult following, and distributors would call us and say, hey, do you want our beer? And then once we went into a market like New York, when we were here initially, and that was only like 7 or 8 years ago maybe, we were selling a container of beer every 6 or 7 weeks and getting nervous about freshness, and now we're sending almost a container a week up here. So it's really just been the consumer deciding on how fast we should grow is kind of how it's worked, and where. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
So I got here late. I might have missed this in the intro, but where did the name Dogfish Head come from?
No,
because those are 3 things I don't really want in my beer.
In your beer, yeah. Maybe the head part. Yeah, I always forget how goofy the name of my company is. Dogfish Head's a jut of land off of Boothbay Harbor, Maine. I grew up in New England, and I wanted, and my wife's from Delaware, so that's how I ended up in Delaware. And I wanted to take a name that had sort of that rustic New England-y feel. And I also didn't want to call our company like Delaware Brewing Company or Rehoboth Brewing Company, because I always dreamed of selling our beer nationally, and I wanted a name that wasn't geographically pigeonholing type of thing, specific. So, and I figured I wouldn't have to fight anyone for a copyright for something as stupid as Dogfish Head. Cool. That's why.
So I was just visiting my family in Denmark, and I brought a bunch of beer for them to taste, and friends too. The only one I brought two of was the 120-minute IPA.
Nice.
And I was the only one left standing 2 nights in a row. And everyone liked it, so, that's great. I am kind of sad that I couldn't have brought the original Worldwide Stout.
You have one from the original?
No, I don't, and I would love to have one. So I'm wondering, why are they 18.3 now?
Oh, okay. Instead of 23 or whatever?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was
it's kind
wondering.
of up to the yeast, but we figured out that the beer actually drank better and tasted better at 18 than it did at 23. So we kind of listened to the consumer, and like in your industry, the feedback is infinite, almost to the point where it's deafening and annoying. And in our world, there's a strong online community at sites like ratebeer.com and beeradvocate.com, and they're just great barometers for the consumer perspective on your beers. And we agree with them in our labs when we taste the beer blind, not from drinking too much of it. It's a blind tasting, and we feel that 18 is better. But I brewed with an awesome brewery in Copenhagen about a year and a half ago. A guy who left Carlsberg and started a brewery in downtown. I forget the name of it, but Old Oldence is the beer that I brewed with him. I think you can get it here. Do you know the name of it? It's got a big O, I think. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I haven't been in Denmark for
A while.
8 years.
Yeah. You should check it out. It's a cool place.
Well, I checked out a lot of beers, but not that one.
Yeah, but actually, and you guys have a culture, as I said earlier, Scandinavia right now is really doing a great job.
Yeah, they
breweries.
started right after I moved.
Oh, this coincidence. Bad coincidence. Yeah.
Thanks.
Short. We've got about 5 minutes. 5 minutes, all right. Oh, sorry, I forgot the
It's okay.
etiquette.
I'm not hurt. So I have a question and a suggestion for you.
Okay.
And you mentioned that what you do at your local brewery is that you have very, very small batches that don't necessarily ever get out beyond your local brewery.
Right.
Which is very similar in some ways to the way that we do things here, which is launch and iterate. We'll launch things that are maybe half-baked, see how people respond to them, move on them, innovate on them, change them. Some of them make it out there. Some of them end up getting pulled back.
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
My question for
Let
you
me
is...
just ask a question there. When you say you kind of half roll it out to a fraction of the hoped for end user, is it always like the hardcore? How do you decide who gets a first look at something?
I'm clearly not an engineer, so you'll have to ask an engineer. But we do that. So you can ask one of these gentlemen or ladies here that can explain
Find someone
that
in a
better.
T-shirt and a beard.
Also, I was a little disheartened by your lack of faith in advertising, but we'll move on. So I suppose my question for you is, what designates a beer? What do you, I guess, what data points do you take, or what do you look at that says this beer is getting ready to be rolled out? Obviously, besides costs, that obviously is there.
Right.
My suggestion to you is that more data points are always better. So if you want to use this office as an extension of your testing lab, I recommend it.
All right. More of an off-site lab, a QC lab, if you will.
It's great.
Right. Well, that's a great suggestion. I'd like to do this every year, so invite me back. I'm down with it. But to your other question, the process is pretty simple. For instance, we're doing this simulcast thing tonight. When I say we don't advertise, we do market, and we do use dogfish.com and Twitter and Facebook, whatever the kids are looking at today.
Google.
We use those crazy things to get the word out. And tonight we're doing an event at Barcade, a great beer bar in Brooklyn.
That's great.
And it's called Simulcast. And at the same time, at 7:50 p.m. In 10 places in D.C., in Philly, New York, and Boston, we're all simultaneously opening these casks of 75-minute IPA. So that is in that case, we picked 3 markets that we knew were hardcore beer savvy, and if the cask beer takes off, we'll open it up next year into new markets. Another example is We have a beer there tonight called Daily Rye, which is a beer designed to taste like pumpernickel bread. Should find a huge demographic, don't you think? And this is the only sixtel that's ever been sold of it outside of our own pub. And what'll happen is some hardcore beer people will be at that event tonight. They'll post their feedback on that beer at Beer Advocate, Rate Beer, Dogfish.com, or wherever our different sites are, and we'll be able to gauge an interest level. And if it's strong, we'll extrapolate that recipe up to our production brewery and do a full release next year. It's usually the kind of direction that something goes from an idea to full release.
Thanks.
Yeah, good question, thank you. I'm supposed to look over here now.
Hi.
You're an engineer.
I'm definitely an engineer. Can't answer that question though, but maybe you can answer mine. I brewed a few batches in my kitchen. It's nothing to write home about yet, but it got me interested in this whole craft beer thing. And when you read Beer Advocate or you read like all these other sites, you read the reviews, and these guys are describing, it's like they're describing a fruit stand down the block. It's not like they're describing a beer. You mentioned that you have a good palate. Is there a way to develop it? How do you know that, I'm going to take this and this and this from my kitchen and I'm going to mash it together and it's going to be good?
Right.
Or how do you even taste all of these things that these guys supposedly find? I don't even know if it's true. Like I drink a beer, I either like it or I don't.
Yeah. You're not like staying up all night thinking about the nuances of the tobacco.
Hints of molasses and fruit and this and that.
But that's what's great about beer. You only have to go as far into it as you want to. I mean, if you look at that beer advocate community or Rate Beer, it's a very vocal minority of even craft brew lovers. A lot of people that buy Dogfish Head would never go to one of those sites because they'd rather drink beer than talk about it. But a lot of us want to talk about it while we drink it. So, you only have to go as far as you want to. That said, if you're looking to sort of further explore how to work on ratios of specialty ingredients for home brewing, that is, I can plug my Extreme Brewing book a little bit, or Joy of Home Brewing. But I would say, actually, for practical reasons, find a local homebrew club. And that's the best way to do it, is share your beers with people, ask them what they're getting out of it. And you get to try theirs, and you get way more comfortable with the nomenclature and the volumes of specialty ingredients that do different things to beer. So I know there's a really active one. Elizabeth can give you information in New York, and I think Rachel too can give information on sort of a self-help group, if you will.
Okay,
with a
thanks.
drinking problem. All right, I only got a couple more minutes. 1 more minute, says John. One last question. This worked out perfectly.
I'll be quick. So I'm from our Mountain View office, and I moved out from New York actually like a year and a half ago, and we couldn't find Dogfish Head then. And you've been distributing a...
Mountain View on BC.
Oh. Hi, Mountain View.
Mountain View's in the house.
And as you can see, they now distribute at Whole Foods, and that's really great. And I was wondering, I mean, we get, I think, the Palo Sanmarone, the 90-minute, and the Midas Touch. But do you guys have plans to distribute some more of the, I guess, more rare and seasonal beers? I mean, those are some of them too, but...
Yeah, that's a good question. We just went into California with 3 beers because we were, again, worried that if demand was too high, our long-term distributors would suffer if we couldn't give them enough. So we chose 3 more specialty 4-pack higher-end beers that, A, we knew would have the shelf life to make the trip out there and still be in great shape, and B, we weren't afraid that we could keep up with the volume on those. So in 09, what we've done is at least added our seasonals. So you can get April Hop out there right now, and then Festina Pesce, which is a tart Berliner Weiss, and then Pumpkin Ale in the fall. So we're every year going to ratchet it up until hopefully someday California will have our full portfolio.
Nice. Also, I had the Utopias and the Extreme Beer Fest a couple years ago, and the Worldwide Stout, and I'd like to say thanks for making a really drinkable, strong beer as opposed to one that is very difficult to drink.
Thank you very much. Hey, before we go, let's hold up our beers and show them to their friends in California that can't drink. You guys can't drink. Touche. Well played, California. Well played. All right.
I'm so sorry to cut you short, Sam. Guys, I'm so sorry. We can't run long. There's a sales all hands in here at 4. But as Sam mentioned, Barcade tonight. He's in town special
6
for
till
that.
9, and aren't we going to drink beers at 5 or something?
And yes, we have a keg that's going to go upstairs. There's also a really great engineering TGIF going on for intergroups. So book signing up front. We got to just make it snappy. If you guys can do me a favor and put your beers, take your cups, because we got to turn the room around for sales, all right? Thanks so much. Thanks
John.
again, sales.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.